My name is Susan Voiles, and most people call me Susie. I live in Sandy Springs, Georgia, which is in Fulton County. I have never experienced in all my time an election quite like this one. I have never seen such poor handling of not only the machinery, but the chain of custody from the very beginning was so flawed. Our first box that we got was a corrugated cardboard box that was not the size of a typical file box, but it was just like maybe a book box if you were moving. It was bound together with packaging tape, and on the top of that, clear packaging tape, on the top of that was the seal that should be totally pressed down like a sticker from the Secretary of State's office, which should, according to the chain of custody, have the signatures of those who had prepared this box, who had been the last to touch it. Likewise, at the end, that would have been my responsibility once we had gone through the contents to do the same thing, replace it with a new seal with my signature and my partner's signature. We were instructed how we were to do the ballots, and our first batch, our first box, contained 8 batches of at least 100 apiece. One batch did have 110 in it. And as we went through the batches, they were normal absentee ballots, and most of them were pretty worn until we came up to a batch that is, my words were pristine. It was white. It was so white. And this is a typical absentee ballot. You can see how when it comes to you in the mail, how it's got many folds in it. These had no folds. You could see where it should have been folded if it went through a folding machine, or for the voter to figure out easily how to do that. But these did not have that. I was running my hands up, and I said to my seatmate, I said, feel these. They feel different. And when you have felt absentee ballots for as long as I have, yeah, the years are creeping up there, you know the feel of them. You know the feel of a real dollar bill. You know the feel of a play dollar bill, even though it might look genuine. But the thing that really jumped out at us, besides the feel of these ballots, besides there were no folds, was the fact that the first one that was bubbled in had almost a little eclipse of white in the bubble where you would bubble in. And in that ballot, everything else was right there. But as we began to proceed through, because we had to sort these by Donald J. Trump, Joseph R. Biden, and Joe Jorgensen, and then write-in if we happened to have a write-in. What we began to notice was an overwhelming amount were exactly, not possibly, but exactly the same. So these absentee ballots had no folds in them. Yet they were presented as absentee ballots, even if they'd wound up as a provisional ballot, which is similar in structure, just different type of envelopes. It would have been exactly the same. There would have been folds in them, but these ballots were exactly the same, and there was one in the middle of this stack that all of us at times have pulled something out of a scanner or a copier too soon, and the image is not square on the paper. And that's exactly the way one of these ballots was in this batch. It was also striking to me that rather than having the customary 100 to the batch, it had 110. We found this to be quite an oddity. We stayed until about 4:45 on Saturday. We were instructed to come back Sunday morning, which we did. On Sunday morning when we went down, it was fairly void of anybody. We were just very surprised. We were instructed to go to our table that we had had the day before. We waited and we waited. The people behind us got theirs. They had over 3,000 from Sandy Springs precincts. The people in front of us had over 6,000 from another precinct. And when our box came, and, our eyes were getting kind of big because that was a lot of ballots to get through. When we got ours, we opened up our box, and the Fulton County ballot boxes are like heavy-duty suitcases with padding on the inside and roller carts. We had the young man unseal ours, and then when we opened it, I was kind of aghast. We had one batch of the machine-generated ballots in there from the BMDs, the ballot marking device. There were 60 of them in that batch. They were all from a Quality Living Center, and which is in, I believe, southwest Atlanta. I do know it's South Atlanta. And all we had was 60. And we stayed around, and we asked for another batch, and we waited, and we waited, and we waited. Did not get one. We volunteered to help the other people who had such enormous stacks, and we were told that we were done. The thing that was also an oddity to us, whether it was the Sunday bunch, I've done this long enough to know the votes are usually fairly even, and this was not the case either with the absentee type ballots or, when you're seeing a stack where 98% of them are for one candidate. Those are overwhelming odds, particularly when you look at the overall vote count. When we were there the night before, there were pallets of ballots that needed to be addressed and counted. And those pallets were non-existent the next day. And to be told we had to block off so much time and miraculously finish by 10 o'clock on Sunday morning and not required for any other service, that was amazing.
I've worked with Fulton County elections for approximately 9 years. As just a precinct manager, poll worker, I was trained by Dominion to be a poll tech worker. And last minute, they said I could come down to the warehouse because they needed help. I went down to the warehouse for 5.5 days. I was there from 8 a.m. to approximately 10 p.m. The warehouse was run by Dominion people because the Fulton County employees had a COVID outbreak. So they were all quarantined, 24 of them. So this was all run by Dominion software people. And I realized they probably have never worked an election, and they don't know the security and the preciousness of a ballot, of someone's vote. So I went over to look at the situation. I told the poll workers, I'm like, well, the media card's what's really important. The paper ballots are just backups. So it'll be okay. They're not going to need these paper ballots anyway. And I was uncomfortable, and I walked away. I went back to my desk to print more test ballots. I had a break. I went over and just helped a gentleman pull ballots out, throw them in a suitcase. People left for dinner, just left the ballots sitting on the floor, unattended. I left that night at 10 p.m., and there was still a suitcase with ballots that I passed as I was walking out the door. It was completely unattended, just left there.
So at the end of the night, the final task is to unlock those bins and collect all of those paper ballots that have fallen into that big container. We collect all of those. You look up inside and make sure none of them have been hung up. There are at least two witnesses for each of those bins, which there's 2 of those bins. We had 4 people plus a couple other people around, plus our local sheriff was there as well. So all these people are watching us take out these paper ballots. And we put them into these red canvas bags. It looks kind of orangey in the picture, but there was 1 red canvas bag per bin, and there was also the red canvas bag that held the provisional ballots that were brought in for that night. So we bring them in. These bags have a specialty zipper and then this flap lock so that that red numbered tab lock can go in them. So we get all the paper ballots into the red bags, zip them up, and I said, where are the number locks? And nobody could find the number locks. They'd gone missing. So I got the supervisor, Sarah's, attention, and I said, where we need the number locks. And these locks are a little different configuration than the ones that go on the voting machines and stuff. They just click in there, and then if you pull it out, it breaks. So she said she didn't have any, and for us to just zip it up and throw them in the blue totes, which are the other pictures that you see, unsecured, and that would be good enough, and they would drive them to the election office, which is maybe between 10 and probably 10 to 12 minutes from our polling place. And I told her, no way, we are not loading these paper ballots into the back of your car with you and your friend to drive them to the election office. You call Robin at the election office and you tell her to have someone bring us the locks. She rolled her eyes, literally walked away, and I just sat there watching those ballots. I was not going to let those out of my sight. Me and another gal named Lori. There was a gal named Gloria. There was an elderly guy that I think had COPD because I brought him his oxygen and helped him out there. We sat there and watched those paper ballots to be sure they were secure until those numbered tag locks could come. So finally, after my second request, they brought the numbered tab locks. And so I asked where the chain of custody forms were, and she said they didn't have any. And I said, it does no good to lock them without a chain of custody form. And she refused to do a chain of custody form and demanded that we throw them in her car. And that's when I took the pictures to document the numbers protecting those paper ballots. The chain of custody form is what proves it hasn't been tampered with. Those bags left that place with the tags I pitched a fit on about and took pictures of, but no chain of custody form. I had no idea what would happen to them after they left that place. I followed the supervisor and her friend, and the sheriff made sure the bags got into the election office, went home, couldn't sleep. Well, I went actually to our poll worker who'd been kicked out's house, had a sleepless night. The next day, I went to the local election office and met with our local election authorities. They wouldn't listen. I gave them pictures of the tab locks, asked them, could we at least look at them and make sure they're still sealed and do a chain of custody form? They refused. He told me, Gary Hamilton, my commissioner on the election board, said it wouldn't matter if a couple 100 ballots went missing. That was the response from my local election office. And so here I knew that we had these unsecured. All our paper ballots were completely unsecured. So then on the Friday, the 13th, when we go to do our initial count of the paper ballots, guess what? They come out of the back room in cardboard boxes, not in the bags I sealed on election night. And there's no chain of custody form. There is no documentation of what happened to those people's ballots between when I locked them up election night and when they walked out in cardboard boxes. I had to bite my tongue because I was a poll watcher and I couldn't take pictures, but there's a whole room full of people who could corroborate that they came out in cardboard boxes, not in those canvas bags. Now you tell me why. They all cheered when the paper ballot count matched the machine count. It means nothing when you count paper ballots that have been handled, removed from their sealed containers, and no documentation of what happened to them in between. Counting paper ballots means zip, nothing.